since 2009 as the monitoring site coordinator. She studied wildlife ecology at the University of Maine and received her master's degree in conservation biology from Antioch Graduate School in New Hampshire, where she studied peregrine falcon migration in Costa Rica for her thesis. That sounds cool. And before HMANA, Julie spent many years migrating as a field biologist, mainly focused on raptor behavioral studies and contamination research. And so we're happy to have Julie here as part of our panel today. Second member of our panel today is Laurie Goodrich from Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. Hi, Laurie. Thanks for being here. Laurie's been with Hawk Mountain in Pennsylvania since 1984, originally as their first full-time biologist. And now she's the Sarkis Akopian Director of Conservation Science. Laurie received her master's in ecology from Rutgers University and her PhD from Penn State. In her role, Laurie oversees all the programs, staff, and facilities from the Conservation Science Department at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. In Pennsylvania, she launched the collaborative Pennsylvania Farmland Raptor and the Broadwing Hawk research projects. And globally, she helped co-found the River of Raptors migration site in Veracruz, Mexico. She also has aided in the development of the Raptor Population Index and still serves on the science committee there today. We're happy to have Laurie here. And last but not least, we have Alan Fish, who is the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory. Hi, Alan. Alan's been with Golden Gate Raptor Observatory since 1985 and serves as their director right now. Alan's background lies in evolutionary ecology and conservation biology from UC Davis. Alan has particular interest in bird population responses to urban development, climate change, and other human pressures. Alan has served as the associate editor for the Journal of Raptor Research and was the chair of the Hawk Migration Association of North America's research committee for half a decade. He's also taught classes and led tours for the California Academy of Sciences. And Alan serves on the advisory board for the Belize Raptor Research Institute and Raptors, Inc. So that's our illustrious panel of raptor experts and friends and collaborators. Let's talk about raptor migration for the next hour or so. I've got some questions to kick us off, and we'll go whatever direction those questions take us. But we'll start big and broad just to get going. And hopefully towards the end of the panel, we'll have time for any audience questions. So if you want to type those into the chat, Kirsten and Sammy will then send those our way once we get to the end. Okay, so let's start with the basics. It takes a lot of energy to cover long distances during migration. What drives animals, including raptors, to do that? And we can kind of do hands up. Anyone that wants to answer, jump in, or I can call on folks. So anyone want to take a first stab at why in the world do these animals spend all this energy to migrate?
Well, okay, I'll try.
Thanks, Laurie.
You guys can fill in. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because we're seeing migration patterns changing all the time. But the basic reason is that resources are declining at this certain latitudes where birds are breeding, so they need to move south in order to survive. But we have all different patterns. We have complete migrants, where pretty much the entire population migrates, and then we have partial migrants like a red-tailed hawk, where some individuals actually don't migrate and others do. So I'm not sure we fully understand all the components there, but I'll let Julie and Alan add to that, or Dave.
I would just pop in with, I think similar to what Laurie said, the world is a patchy place. It's always been a patchy place. Raptors have been around for 30 million years, a lot of time to figure out where the opportunities lie. And of course, if the opportunities change or diminish or become glacial or overheated, those particular lineages die out. So raptor migration specifically, I think, is about opportunism and adaptation getting hardened into a genetic construction or genetic flexibility. I always feel like one of the things we see in California, in the Bay Area, is I tell people I study raptor migration, and I've had people adamantly tell me that their hawks don't migrate. And they're probably right. A Bay Area red-tail probably doesn't leave for the winter if it's got a good territory. But a lot of birds sure migrate through here en route to other places. So the word I like that Laurie uses, complexity. The complexity and mystery of raptor migration is enormous. And we just know a little bit of the surface of it.
Yeah, it's definitely complex. Anything to add to that, Julie?
No, I think that Alan and Laurie summed it up well. You know, all the more reason to keep monitoring raptors during migration, just because we don't know a lot about it, and as Laurie said, things are always changing as the climate changes and the landscape changes. So we're just always learning new things about migration.
For sure. And kind of not the same thing happens everywhere. Maybe we can delve into that later on here in our discussion, for sure. So sort of to add to that, you know, lots of animals migrate. It's not just raptors, but we seem to spend a lot of time focused on raptor migration. There's, you know, all of our organizations spend a lot of time on it. And it's kind of part of the life cycle that we put a lot of emphasis on for raptors. Why do you think that is?
I can start us off a little bit and just mention what good indicators raptors are for overall environmental health. You know, they're in most of our ecosystem types, and they're high up on the food chain, and you know, they're really pretty sensitive to environmental contaminants, you know, and have large home ranges. And so I feel like we're not only learning about raptors, we're learning about everything that's interconnected, and they're just so incredibly easy to monitor. You know, there's that. There's that piece too.
And it's fun to watch these wild creatures that you don't get to see, and when they're being reclusive on their nesting areas, all of a sudden there's thousands of them going over your head. So it's hard to resist.
When I was about 23, I gave an Associated Press talk, an interview to say how important raptor migration study was, because I went into barometers of the environment and easy to look at, and Bill Clark called me up about 2 hours later and said, "You forgot to say it was fun." So I'm really glad Laurie just said it was fun, because that's a big part of it. I see raptors as an entry drug to bird watching, and bird watching is, of course, an entry drug to environmental thinking. And so we got double the power of our entry drug with raptors. It's an incredibly powerful group of species for getting people excited that didn't know they loved nature. It's a great entry point.
It's definitely the greatest spectacle going on in the sky on Earth, I would say, you know, and like you said, Alan, it's an incredible hook, and just such a great way to engage people of all ages, especially young people, you know, seeing a bald eagle for the first time or their first kettle of broadwings. It's just an incredible way to connect people to the natural world, and why they should be protecting it.
Yeah, I think you all hit it on the head for me. It's really easy spot to get information for a lot of species from one place, right? And it is fun. It definitely hooks people. So we know that it's fun. How about the next question is, you know, what exactly are we able to learn from migration data? Migration count data.
Wow, what can't we learn is maybe a better question. I'll tell you one of these.
That's my follow-up question. So I'm glad you're gonna cover it.
Okay, sorry, Dave. One of the exciting things for me about getting to be at one location looking at raptor migration, Golden Gate for 30 many years, has been how simple I thought the story was in the mid 1980s, and how incredibly complex and much more interesting it is. And the more scientists we hook up with, the more complex the stories become. and the more interesting analytical techniques, from MODIS towers to satellite transmitters to sampling feathers and sampling blood and isotopes and a whole range of stuff that tell us not just, I think the old model and really born at Hawk Mountain was population trends from raptor counts, and how incredibly valuable those were for Rachel Carson to mine from the data that Maurice Brune was collecting. And then on top of that, to look at banding and radio tracking as a way of finding out what the populations were that you were monitoring. All of that made sense. But in the last 30 years, a lot of what we've been doing at GGRO is to continue to say, when we have a raptor in hand, when we're holding a raptor, what can we learn from the bird in terms of the stressors on its life? And really seeing the raptor as the individual raptor as an opportunity to analyze stressors that are going on, whether it's West Nile virus or rodenticides or population genetic structure or isotopes, to consider all the possibilities, heavy metals in the feathers. And so I think I really think the opening up opportunity for us to use these raptor migration sites as environmental sampling techniques, both for raptors, but also for broader environmental stories, is just without limit. It's an exciting time to be alive and looking at raptors.
Yeah, I guess I would add to what Alan's saying. Alan's talking about the big picture, but I think also the population monitoring is a reflection of, provides us that reflection, just like it did with Rachel Carson. It pointed to something that was going on in the broader environment that we needed to pay attention to. And I think we're, currently with the Raptor Population Index, which we're all partnering on, is, we're seeing declines in forest raptors that we didn't know had a problem. So these migration counts are informing that and providing us an opportunity to step in on the conservation front of things more quickly than maybe we would if we weren't out there counting them. So now we can, even though these birds are still common, we're seeing these long-term declines in American kestrel, and there's a lot of research now going on with that. And more recently, we're seeing these forest declines. So I think it's, just connecting the dots a little bit from what Alan said.
How about Julie? You have anything to add to that? You oversee hundreds of interact with hundreds of count sites.
I do. Yeah, there's a lot of about 200 or so active HawkWatch sites that are in the monitoring network that HMANA kind of oversees. And, a lot of them are kind of more data oriented, and others are kind of more in it for educational purposes, so it's neat to support all the different goals of each HawkWatch site, not just the ones that are the long-term sites that have been counting for 40 plus years, but just the sites that are elementary schools that maybe just go out a few days a year. So I think there's real value in those sites as well. Yeah, as far as things we're learning, I think you guys really nailed it, just so much about raptor behavior, their migration patterns, how they're changing year to year in different regions in response to climate, and what Laurie was mentioning, just the incredible amount of information we've been able to learn from our RPI project.
Yeah, I think pulling together that information from all of these efforts across the continent is pretty important and useful. And yeah, I think you all covered that question pretty well. We can learn a lot. And then I like that Alan highlighted what we can do in addition, right? So the count data tell us things. They identify trends to me. They tell us the what. They don't necessarily tell us the why. And sampling birds caught on migration or spending energy on kestrel studies during different parts of the year to understand those patterns that we see in the migration data is an important kind of next step to me, for sure. Cool. So operating a migration count site or sites is intensive. It requires a lot of time and effort and people power. What do you say to people who don't really understand why you're investing so much time and energy in your sites, about the importance and why we need to gather these long-term data? We kind of covered it a little bit, but I think just, what to you, what are the most important things in the justification for the investment?
Okay, I'll start. I feel like this is Julie's question. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of sites that are volunteer run, and then there's a number of sites that are staffed with seasonal biologists or other staff. So there's all kinds of scenarios out there. And, obviously the monitoring of the raptors is giving us population information on the raptors and potentially, as Julie said, an index to what's going on in the environment. But the education side of it is really important. And I think raptors are, like Alan said, an entry into caring about the environment. And I think counting them helps people understand what's going on. So even if we were just sitting up there watching, I don't think it would have the same message, because we can say to somebody that's newly walked up to a HawkWatch, we just had 20 bald eagles go over, and all of a sudden there's all kinds of questions in their mind about populations and how come there's so many of them here and that kind of thing. So I think the counting and the education really dovetail together really well. And as Alan said, that leads to conservation. So that's something we want to see happen everywhere.
Definitely.
I would just add what do you say to people who don't understand the investment? I've learned over the years to avoid those people. If they don't understand the investment, there's something incredibly obtuse or who knows, genetic, behavioral, nature, nurture, who knows where it comes from, but it's in terms of talking somebody into the value of it, there again, Laurie kind of alluded to this, but put any of those people underneath a migration at any of the incredible sites in the United States, across the world. I mean, if their curiosity and enthusiasm doesn't fall out of their pores, they're dead to the world. I don't know. It's so exciting. I know we've all participated in this opportunity. Yesterday, I met a 7-year-old kid up on Hawk Hill above the Golden Gate named Henry. And every bird he saw was a red tail, and he was just 10 feet off the ground with excitement. He was seeing kestrels, they were red tails. He was seeing peregrines, they were red tails. And finally, he announced that he was the founder of the Junior Raptor Society, which I was quite impressed by. And then he admitted he started it yesterday, and he was the president. And I got to tell you, this kid was it just was wonderful to see a human who completely took it all in, the excitement, the curiosity, the joy. And I know we've all had those experiences ourselves, but adults and kids alike are capable of that. And I think that's really the bottom line, is curiosity that becomes important questions. And it's so exciting to see that process in a human being.
I would agree with that also. We do it, obviously we're all invested very deeply in the value of the data and what we can learn from that, but also just how awesome the spectacle is. I feel like every time I go hawk watching, we've just meddled with so much around this planet, and we are in our houses and our cars, and we're always staring at our devices, and when I go hawk watching, I completely disconnect from all that, and can just really, I feel like it connects me to this this phenomenon that's been happening, you know, for hundreds of thousands of years, and it's like nature therapy. You know, it teaches me to slow down and to not only watch the raptors and how they're reacting, or you know, how they're interacting with other species in the environment, but just, you know, all the subtle seasonal changes you see when you're hawk watching, and you get to know, just get to know it so closely. So yeah, it's the best.
I agree. You all nailed it. There's the data, right? These long-term data that you can't go back and get that do tell us something. But then there's that connection and that outreach, and people show up to count sites, and they don't even realize how many different kinds of raptors there are in their area, right? And to start to learn that has intrinsic value, and then they start to value that, and you've got to value something before you support conservation efforts focused on it. So yeah, definitely. All right, maybe let's take a real quick break from all this serious stuff and do a lightning round question. Let's see. First count site you ever spent time at?
Go ahead, Laurie.
Yeah, sorry. Cape May, New Jersey.
For me, back in 2000, it was Eagle Valley on the Mississippi River in Wisconsin. I was hired for my first HawkWatch there and had no idea how life-changing it was going to be. You know, I just needed one or two of those days with 100+ bald eagles migrating, and just the amazing influx of blue jays and woodpeckers and everything else, tundra swans. It blew my mind, and it changed me forever. So from that point, I focused pretty much solely on migration in all my field work.
I was lucky to do a bunch of years at Davis as an undergrad, and got into raptors and birds at that time. But I didn't get to a migration site till I was hired to work at Golden Gate in the mid '80s. So, but one of the most exciting things is, of course, traveling to other migration sites and getting to see, getting to visit Laurie at Hawk Mountain, and visit Go Shoots and visit Cape May and other places around the world have changed. Every time I've done that is a new experience, and changed my entire view of what was going on in raptor migration and how different all our locations are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think mine was Lucky Peak in Idaho when I was a grad student at Boise State, and kind of going back there. But I think you kind of hit on it, Alan, that, I'm sure we all get this question, like, what's your favorite count site to go to, right? And it's the question that, well, favorite in what ways? Each of them has their value and are different for a lot of ways. And my favorite is either the one I'm just heading towards, or the one I'm just leaving, right? It's great. So yeah, thanks for sharing those stories. When we think about findings that we make through the long-term monitoring that we do at these count sites, what are some of the important findings that you've either been a part of, or your organization has been a part of, or just in general in your mind? Like, what are the biggest contributions to conservation that we've gotten out of these kinds of efforts? Everybody's thinking.
That's a great question, and it'd be fun to spend an hour each of us on that. Boy, it was discovered back in the 70s. It was discovered that there was an annual broad-winged hawk migration through Golden Gate, and I think it blew everybody away. In fact, the early bird watchers weren't sure if they were seeing dark morph broadwings or dark morph short-tailed hawks in the earliest years, just because each one was completely absurd for seeing at California. But it might surprise people to know that we see annually more broad-winged hawks at Golden Gate than we see Swainson's, ferruginous, and roughleg combined. And by an order of like 10 times more than those combined. So Swainson's hawks, although they're big in the west, they don't like the coast. They tend to migrate down the valleys. So, but the broad-winged hawk migration is really exciting, interesting, predictable. It's the only place in California to regularly see broadwings, and so it makes the birders real happy. And learning to figure out what's going on with that migration by itself is a long-term mystery that's unfolding. So I would just throw that in as a kind of general theme.
That's a hard question, Dave. I've been at Hawk Mountain my entire career. It's kind of like Alan. So a lot of stuff revolves around Hawk Mountain, but I think was in charge of our data collection for 30 years or more. And I'm proud of the effort that we put in at Hawk Mountain to get our data analyzed and get it early on, get it on the computer on an hourly basis, because it wasn't hourly in the beginning, so that we got all that data even going back to 1934 on the computer so that it could be analyzed was a pretty big achievement. Of course, now we just assume it's all going to happen because we're all at our computers entering it. Back then, we had to have volunteers enter the data, then I had to proof it. It was a big effort. Then I also would highlight the Veracruz River Raptors. I was one of the co-founders of that project with Ernesto Morales and Steve Hoffman from HawkWatch International. And that was, we had no idea that there was that volume of birds going through Eastern Mexico at the time. The first fall season, Ernesto said, I think we're going to get 1 million birds in Veracruz. And well, it turns out it's, closer to 5 million. After the more scientific data are collected. So that's been exciting. It's been a lot of work to keep it going. And I know they're struggling right now to keep it going because of the pandemic, cutting down on tours. So that's another thing. And then of course, Raptor Population Index, which we've mentioned, is a collaborative effort between a lot of hawk counts groups or hawk migration sites to try to do the best statistical analysis of population trends and get that data out. And I'm really excited that this year we have money to redo the website and make some more user-friendly public outreach on that topic. So there's always something to be excited about.
Well, for me, I would say for my personal HawkWatch that I count at, it's been incredible to see the changes in raptor populations just in the last probably 13, 14 years that I've been kind of counting there. So to see bald eagle numbers skyrocket, our peregrine numbers to skyrocket, it's been interesting to see just the ups and downs of our kestrels, for instance, and just kind of stay with the site long enough. I did so much jumping around for so many years. It's fun to actually be in one place and see the changes. And from a HMANA perspective, I'll echo what Laurie said, to see the RPI project grow. It was just kind of in the beginning when I came on to HMANA 10 years ago. And it's been great to see the monitoring network grow. Especially through the tropics. A lot more sites are coming on. And it's been exciting that we can support them as HMANA grows and its programs grow and our grants grow a bit. So we're able to offer more support to sites. I get really excited about some of these South American sites, and we hear about new monitoring efforts happening everywhere. I'm always reaching out to counters and seeing if they can join this network. We're gonna probably have to change our name from HMANA to, I don't know, it's not North America anymore. So that's been really rewarding to see.
Maybe HMAO, Hawk Migration Network, Association of the World.
Yeah, why stop at North and South America?
Right. Yeah, I think there's the excitement of what happens at individual sites or clusters of sites. My charge is is 8 sites in the West that are part of HawkWatch International's network, but scaling up to the RPI effort in looking continent-wide and having not that tunnel vision of what's happening just at the go shoots, for instance, but what's happening regionally or continent-wide in terms of some other trends for species. I think that, that's an important next step, and that, that we're at that point that we're collaborating and cooperating and doing that enough now that we can see those conservation success stories that you were talking about, Julia, like the bald eagle and the peregrine falcon, and that we can see that, we need to pay more attention to American kestrels and maybe even sharp-shinned hawks or golden eagles in some places, right? That's to me is the value and the importance of long-term monitoring, for sure. How about, we've talked about kind of what we've gotten out of it. What would the three of you like to be learning from long-term monitoring, but that we aren't? And what would it take to do whatever your answer is?
I'll be happy to jump on that. But again, it could go in so many thousands of directions. I don't know if the rest of you caught this. Dave used the term HMANA a few minutes ago, and I was thrilled that you said that. I'm thrilled that Julie referenced it. I've always thought the opportunity to cast the hawk migration community net more purposefully and broadly around the world would be super exciting. And some of the people I've gotten to visit at hawk migration sites in Europe and Asia, and the opportunity to chat with people in South America who are at where a lot of North American sites were decades ago and are just getting started, and to lend bigger support down to Veracruz, as Laurie was talking about, the opportunity to use the money and the strength of what's happened in North America to connect more broadly around the world with hawk migration studies and research and community building and support and education, interpretation and understanding of global climate relationships is never been greater. We could be a relatively small online community, and an opportunity to support each other. It's just, I think it's a really ripe time for that. So Hamau just passed by really quickly, and I just want to put a big neon light around that, because I think that would be a super exciting project to develop broadly. And I just say on a more regional level, I'm excited about MODIS towers and the opportunity to work with the MODIS techniques to see movements of birds in regional areas, in the importance of regional locations, whether it's the Cascade Mountain Range or the Great Basin, or the Central Valley of California, or the Appalachian Ridge, to look at linear and broad geographical areas to understand how landscape and raptor migration work together. I wish I were starting my career again, because I'd love to see the next 60, 70 years of what's going to happen with the new techniques coming up. Thanks.
I guess I would also add, I think there's an opportunity, at least at some sites, to collect more data on other birds that are migrating by. And HMANA's done a little bit of that with monarch butterfly counts and dragonfly counts. And but at Hawk Mountain, we count everything that goes over, and we have to use 2 counters sometimes to do that. But so there's an opportunity to, because raptors are not migrating in a vacuum, there's other species that they could be tied to. There's questions about that could be looked at. And I know in Veracruz, they're counting the water birds. So if each site kind of had a couple of species, blue jays, as Julie mentioned, are real easy to count, that we could get the other counts going and then figure out where to put that data so that it can be analyzed in the future.
Yeah, there's so much we could be doing and so much to get excited about. MODIS, I'm really excited about too, Alan. Just the evolution of telemetry. You know, Laurie and her crew came up from Hawk Mountain this summer, and I got to help out with putting transmitters on Broadwings here in my little town in New Hampshire. And there's nothing cooler in all the world than seeing where those birds from a mile down the road are, you know, making their way down the Appalachians and right about to Veracruz, you know, and where they're going to spend the winter. That blows my mind. So I'm continually amazed at just at how telemetry evolves. I think I'm also excited for RPI to grow and fall kind of into the right hands for people making management decisions. I feel like a lot of emphasis right now for bird populations is kind of put on breeding data and wintering data. So I know we've been working really hard at the RPI, the Raptor Population Index, to try and just get it into right hands for people making those decisions for the species. And one other thing, I guess I could say that I hope for long-term monitoring is kind of reaching out to a wider community, a more diverse community for hawk watching, maybe more efforts in inner cities, in more schools. And it's something we're trying to do at HMANA. We have a very tiny staff right now, which is basically me and Jason running Hawk Count. But it's something not only to try and offer support to the sites that these long-term sites where a lot of people are retiring and there's nobody there to take over. You know, we've lost a number of RPI, long-term RPI sites in the last few years because nobody has any interest. So just trying to support those sites as best we can, and also hopefully, you know, finding new sites in areas where we really need coverage, where birds are migrating and there's nobody there to count them. But as I said, yeah, just kind of a more diverse audience. I'd love to have more efforts in kind of more diverse and inner city areas.
Yeah, great answers. I think too, like, you know, the new technology and kind of, I'll ask about some banding efforts here in a minute, but that technology is exciting. You know, broadening the network in places where people are counting is super exciting and really good to do. But, you know, the other thing I point out, or I mention, is like, in terms of the future of migration monitoring, like you just kind of hit it, Julie, is that, like, we need to keep these sites going, right? The intent of a long-term monitoring site is that it's doing the same thing year after year after year, so that we get that that picture into the future, because you can't go back and get those data. And when we want to know about things that are on decline or things that are on rebound or just staying stable or changing their timing, we can't go back and get that information. So the continuity piece is pretty important, I think, as well as expansion. So, you know, we do, you know, some count sites also band, others don't. For those count sites that do band, I think, what do we learn from that process?
I can speak from the Golden Gate perspective. Banding since 1983 and are up around 50, almost under, just under 50,000 birds banded. Golden Gate's really lucky in this respect because we have a pretty, I think because of the number of urban areas on the California coast, we have a pretty high band recovery rate. We're up around 4 to 5% for Bootios and 2% on accipiters, with color banding that was introduced at Golden Gate by Chris Briggs and Teresa Ely over the last 6-7 years. We've been able to double those band recovery rates. So our band recovery rates actually give us pretty good pictures of raptor movement. And this isn't always true for banding because the recovery rates can be so low, under 1% at many migration spots. So we've been really fortunate that way, that we've been able to really paint a picture of what the Pacific Raptor flyway looks like, and its actual range, and also looked at seasonal areas. So banding's given us quite a lot of information just in terms of recovery. More or as valuable, I guess I would say, is we've had a wonderful, productive, long-term relationship with the Dr. Josh Hull's lab in UC Davis. And Josh, as a long-term, really lifetime collaborator with Golden Gate, has worked closely with our staff to be able to figure out, again, what the interesting stressors and sampling opportunities are when you have a raptor in hand. We were able to see in 2004, 2005, after West Nile virus blew through California, that up to 13% of the red-shouldered hawks that we were trapping and banding actually had high antibody titers for West Nile virus. They were surviving West Nile virus. And that was pretty exciting to figure out. Couldn't have done it without Josh's lab and his commitment to the project. So over the years, our scientific collaborations with academics and agencies, and of course, other raptor migration sites have been really critical to doing the best kind of science and understanding the biggest picture, especially for what banding and holding hawks, since that's a privilege and something we want to do respectfully. It's given us an opportunity to, I think, milk those data for the maximum benefit for the raptors.
Yeah, I mean, Hawk Mountain doesn't have its own banding station like you guys, but we do collaborate with volunteer banding stations on the ridge here when we're interested in asking some scientific questions. And like Alan said, it's just really valuable to be able to get your hands on a raptor when you have a specific question about health or why is something declining. You can do some additional measurements or blood sampling. And I would say we've learned, of course, over the years, kind of what the flyways look like in a very broad sense by looking at band recovery data. So by saying, okay, where are birds from Eastern Canada going versus the Great Lakes? And you can create these maps, and that kind of gives you an insight. But even more recently, you can look at things like, well, for American kestrel, you can look at our males and females wintering at the same latitude, our adults and immature sharp-shinned hawks migrating different distances, or showing any kind of leapfrog migration or other kinds of questions. But I think this is something, Alan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that's been done more out west. But what has been surprising also is this migration's not always going in the direction that, or movements aren't always going direct in the direction that we sort of predict that they will. And a lot of birds show this post-breeding dispersal where they're moving north, or they're moving north and west. And we've seen that in some of our broadwings with our telemetry, that about 30% of the females, and we're not sure what the males are doing, are moving north prior to moving south. And I know that, Alan, there's been some research on red-tailed hawks, and I think Cooper's hawks out west, that are showing that like a certain proportion are going way north before they maybe go south. I'm not sure. Do they even go south? Maybe you can answer that.
We've seen a lot of, in the early years at GGRO, I was doing talks at HMANA conferences that were like reverse migrations at Golden Gate, and eventually we kind of got a sense that it's bits and pieces. That in places that are moderate winter climates, you wouldn't expect a bird necessarily to travel south thousands of miles. It wouldn't make any kind of evolutionary sense. But probably the most exciting data on this that Laurie might be touching on is Pete Bloom's work in Southern California, looking at red-tailed hawks and finding a pattern, not just like a few birds here and there, but a big pattern with lots of radio satellite telemetry birds, that juvenile red-tailed hawks leave nesting territories in Southern California travel to Montana and Idaho to spend the first few months of their fall. And then when hard winter hits, then they fly back to Southern California, essentially to their natal territories in the general area. And they spend the wintertime in Southern California. And then the following July, they don't breed. Many yearling raptors don't breed yet. So as yearling raptors, they move back up to the Rocky Mountains and the Great Basin for another summer up in Montana and Idaho. And of course, the big question that Pete asked and that we all ask is, what the hell is the magnet that's drawing those birds up into those areas? And Pete had two words that wouldn't surprise anybody up in Idaho, which is ground squirrels. That explosions of ground squirrels are somehow genetically programmed into these bootios in Southern California as part of the thing that's going to allow them to survive their first winters of life. And if they can get into one of these explosive ground squirrel scenarios, they can survive the first few years, which is really that's really the whole tipping point for, I think, a lot of raptor movements. We didn't talk about it before, but we see it over and over again that raptor migration in the West, at least in California, I think is a lot about surviving the first winter mortality of life. We have a very juvenile biased migration on the California coast, like up to 80–85% juveniles. And I think a lot of it is about getting to a place where prey supplies are going to create survivability past the first birthday of the bird.
Great. Yeah, I mean, there's so much we can learn. I always remind people, and I have to remind myself too, that like tracking with either telemetry, but also, you know, the banding efforts is this long-term game. You know, you throw all these rings on birds, and like Alan said, in a lot of cases we get 1% or fewer recoveries, but those recoveries are pretty important, and they can tell you a lot about space use for not a lot of resources, and that's kind of neat. We just got a recovery from a bird banded in New Mexico in 1990. This past summer, red-tailed hawk recovered at Mono Lake. So that's a bird that was almost 22 years old, and it's just this long-term effort. And if you're not continuing to do it, you won't get those bands out there, and you won't have the chance to get those recoveries for sure. We're getting towards the top of our hour. I'm going to ask one more question, and then ask some of the questions from the audience here. But you've all been in this field for quite some time. What's something that surprises you most about hawk watching and hawk watchers and all that entails?
I'll jump into the mix on this one, but that's I think the thing that surprised me the most is partly from GGRO data. It's partly from reading other people's research, and it really is an idea that that I think I first encountered with some research done by the Peregrine Fund biologist Granger Hunt, who was working on bald eagle nesting in far northern California back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And one of the things, Granger is a pilot, so he was radio tracking bald eagle chicks from the nest to their first autumn and winter sites from nest sites in far northern California. And what Granger found was that half a dozen, maybe 8 birds that were from different nest sites made slightly different routes to get to the same spot in the Fraser River Delta at the perfect timing to hit the peak of salmon spawning in September. So a whole bunch of things going on just in that message. One is they're not going south, they're going north, okay, which Laurie was alluding to earlier. The second thing is they were not following adult bald eagles. They were traveling independently. They were going on their own accord. So this is instructions, these instructions for getting to this peak of salmon spawning are in the egg. They're in the egg. They're in the egg of the bald eagle. They are so genetically programmed. They're genetically programmed to both have a timetable, a schedule, and to have a map. And some of them went north in the Cascades and then cut westward to the coast. Some of them went westward to the coast of California, went up through Oregon and Washington on the coast northward. So they made different routes, but they got to the same result, which is kick-ass salmon migration, survival of the winter, and the patchiness, again, of an incredible resource. So what does this say to me? This says that there's a whole lot we don't understand about raptors having maps and schedules of prey opportunities that are the very thing that will allow them to survive their winters, their hard mortality in the first few years. And to me, that's just incredibly exciting. How stupid we are, but also how much room there is to learn the stories of these birds, especially the ones that are making counterintuitive directional movements, where there's patchy prey, whether it's ground squirrels or spawning salmon. It's super exciting that there's mysteries about that. And there was a note in the comments, I'll just say, about neotropical raptors. Tropical raptors, again, without seasonality like we're used to in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. In the temperate zones, tropical raptors afford more opportunity for understanding raptors in terms of prey movements, prey-based movements, and how genetically programmed those might be. Those aren't just accidental movements where they happen to come across a salmon run. Oh boy, look, a salmon run. They actually have those programs in their genetic systems. And that's just thrillingly interesting and mysterious to me. Sorry to talk so long, but that's a big place of excitement.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think there's new things to get excited about and surprise me all the time, but I'll mention two, kind of following up on what Alan mentioned. But and one is from hawk watching, my own time at hawk watching over the years. I've had two incidences where, because we often get asked this question, are the raptors migrating together? And honestly, I don't think the telemetry data has really addressed that yet, because we tend to spread our telemetry units out. We don't usually tag family groups, but maybe somebody has, but I'm not aware of it. But twice when I've been hawk watching, I've seen what I 99% sure was a mated pair that was migrating together. And the reason I know this or suspect this is one was a peregrine falcon adult that roosted in front of a lookout. And then 20 minutes later, another peregrine falcon came in, zoomed from really high up, shoot, right down, sat next to that other peregrine falcon, right next to it. And they started touching each other. To me, that doesn't happen when you have, very unlikely, unless somebody wants to correct me on it, that peregrine falcons that don't know each other probably aren't going to do that. The same thing happened with a pair of bald eagles, and it was before they started migrating. It was a drizzly day. There was a bald eagle I noticed in a tree, so not having other birds to look at, I put the scope on it, and all of a sudden, this second bald eagle, notably smaller than the first bald eagle, sat next, jumped over from an adjacent tree and started preening the first bald eagle. Again, to me, that's a sign that that pair had been in movement together, and then when the weather cleared, they took off. So that's one thing. And the other thing I would say kind of dovetails with our study of broad-wing hawk migration using telemetry is reflects on what Alan is saying, is the timing of these birds are coming from all over the continent, but when they get down to Veracruz, Mexico, they all are passing with a very, very short period of time. And when we did all of our, we had like 12 or 13 broad-wing hawks from Pennsylvania that we had put units on, it was within less than a week's time period. And then I'm assuming we're going to see the same thing with the New Hampshire birds, but we're looking at that now. But just an amazing amount of coordination, considering all the things that they're dealing with, weather and so forth.
I echo what you both said. Really, I think that what surprises me most is just how how constantly interested and excited I get about migration every single day, you know, and what is going to come across the horizon next, you know, as you're scanning. It's always a mystery. You never know what you're going to see. And I'm always surprised by the behavior, especially at HawkWatch sites, and just how species are interacting, seeing, as you said, Laurie, you know, birds migrating together, you know, harriers coming in pairs, ospreys often coming in pairs, so many questions, you know. And like you were saying, Alan, what we've learned about some of these from telemetry and banding efforts with these erratic patterns, you know, a broadwing hawk that was had a telemetry unit here in New Hampshire this summer after breeding went up to the Canadian border, you know, before heading all the way south. So just so many mysteries out there. And I think it's really exciting to think about just all the new studies that lay ahead and where we're going to be in another 10 years, maybe, with the evolution of telemetry and raptor monitoring. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more to learn, and technology and just the people that are passionate about it are the ways that we're gonna be able to get there and do that for sure. Yeah, convoys of different kestrels. It's like, yeah, they must be traveling together because they're coming in these lines, right? And then that's interesting. You know, the flip side and surprising people part of hawk watching to me is how into it people get, whether it's their first time or it's their 26th visit to a site because they were on a crew there at some point in time, and these places become important, magical, you know, parts of their lives, and they make journeys and make it a yearly thing to go and spend a day or a week at a HawkWatch site.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of cool. And so I think that's neat. I'm gonna pick a few of the questions that the audience have submitted real quick. We aren't gonna have time to get to a ton of them, but hopefully we can get to a few. And actually, I'm gonna lump a couple of them kind of together. So we've got some questions that are linked towards like our tracking ability, right? So Paul asks about radio telemetry and how it's changed our understanding of raptor dispersal and migration. And Nancy's asking kind of about MODIS towers and how they're going to inform hawk migration too. And then those are kind of similar topics. So maybe we'll spend a minute or two on that.
I'll just address the radio tracking thing because we've done a fair amount at Golden Gate that I'm, unfortunately, we haven't published much, but we're able to put out a publication about 2 years ago on the broadwing hawk migration from California to Mexico, which it's just so exciting. You know, it's radio telemetry now. It's going to have a more specialized purpose in tracking because of the effort that needs to be made to radio track as opposed to satellite track, or maybe because it's going to be the realm of those of us who are cheap and can't afford to satellite track all that we want to. But it actually functionally worked really well for us to track broadwings by radio telemetry because our 2 to 3 carloads of people could actually follow them from here to Mexico, San Francisco to Mexico, getting to high points. And the obvious thing is that radio tracking compared to banding tracking just gives you process. You can see, if you can stay up with the birds, you can learn habitat relationships, roost sites, speed of migration, strategy of migration, whether it's ridge lift or thermals and valleys. There's just so much detail about the process of migration, and that's just super. That's great food for migration intellect and fun to learn. MODIS towers, we are babies in the West. I think most of the work right now is the Northeast and the Great Lakes. So I don't know if Julie or Laurie can speak to that, but the little bit that I've heard about it and read about it from mostly the Great Lakes folks has me pretty excited to help our area move into that kind of research.
I don't know, Dave, you may be the one who's done more with it. I don't know, but yeah, I think telemetry and MODIS together can offer us an opportunity to understand what the birds are doing when they're not flying over our heads. And I think one of the more important things with telemetry, both radio and satellite, is, you know, from a conservation standpoint, is trying to understand what the birds need on migration. Are they stopping? Are they feeding? What habitats are they using? Because I think that's the big conservation challenge is, okay, we know the birds are migrating, we know kind of where they're going. Not always, but somewhat. But habitats quickly disappearing everywhere. So we need to understand what the birds need so that we can better protect them. And with MODIS, you know, you have an opportunity to tag smaller birds. It's been done, a lot of it's been done with songbirds to date. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to learn more. It's being done with kestrels now to better understand what those birds are doing. I think sharp-shinned hawks and others could be prime candidates.
Yeah, you guys nailed it.
Yeah, I think for those that might not know what MODIS towers are, right? They're just these receiving towers that you have to have a power source and a place to put the antenna on, right? And you build a network of these towers that are just out there actively receiving signals from units that animals are carrying, whether it's a digital signal or a VHF signal, and essentially if the animal passes by within range, the tower picks it up and records it and logs it and sends it to a central clearinghouse that then gets back to the researchers that deployed the tags. And like Alan mentioned, there's a larger network of MODIS towers in sort of the eastern part of the continent right now, but that effort is growing in the West. And I think just like with hawk count sites is like collaborating and being strategic and putting a network of those towers out that kind of covers a lot of areas will then start to pick up not only the pathways and the places that these animals are stopping, but the timing of how they get where they go after you mark them, and those sort of things. And so that's exciting technology. It's a lot less expensive to put those kinds of units on animals. You can put them on smaller animals, like Laurie was saying, like the smaller raptors for sure. And so that's an exciting direction that animal tracking is going, I think. And it can be any animal. It doesn't have to be raptors. And then the telemetry, satellite telemetry, those units are getting smaller and smaller, and those of us that are looking at the count data and seeing that sharp-shinned hawks are counts are declining in the last 10 years are excited about the ability to start to try to track some of those. And we've actually just deployed some 5-gram units on sharp-shinned hawks at the Go Shoots in this past week, and we're excited to see how those work and where those birds go. So yeah, super exciting stuff. I'm going to do one more question here from Julia, and she wants to know if we can provide some specific examples of how all the data from count sites collected over the years has translated into concrete conservation programs, either through legislation or other projects. I see everybody's smiling. So can you think of any examples of that?
Well, Alan mentioned one earlier with DDT, that Hawk Mountain's bald eagle counts were used in Rachel Carson's book, which eventually led to some banning of DDT. And I know in the 90s, there was a lot of concern about sharp-shinned hawks and in the East declining very rapidly. And it did lead to some additional research monies by US Fish and Wildlife to try to look at what was going on with them. Fortunately, they rebounded, so we didn't get any big conclusions on that. The American kestrel, the counts from American kestrel, there's other data sources that were looked at, but migration counts have been part of why they've ended up on species of special concern list in a number of states.
I'll just throw in two. Golden Gate counts have been used to actually understand both the human biases and the timing raptor migrations through the Altamont Pass, which is a field of raptor Cuisinarts over a whole bunch of thousands of acres in the greater East Bay, just about 40, 50 miles from here. So understanding that relationship at least, and looking at data sources, both as a way of understanding variability in counts, the human bias in counts, which is not something we've talked about, is really useful to be able to track, and then timing of events, what raptors should be expected at particular times, what's the phenology of the migration in a local sense is super useful. And I'll just throw as an aside, although we've done some work on rodenticide impact on raptors, and have learned that as many as 8% of juvenile red-tailed hawks are flying into Golden Gate with a cocktail of rodenticides already in their body that's detectable in their bloodstream. More importantly, perhaps, is nesting studies that we've done in the local area have shown Cooper's hawks especially to be susceptible to rat poisons. And some of that work translated into, this is sort of the inspiration of volunteers' part, had translated into one of our volunteers, an incredible environmental journalist named Lisa Owens-Viani, to begin an international coalition of rat poison policy improvements called RATS, Raptors Are the Solution. And Lisa's work has contributed now to a passage of a California state bill in order to reduce consumer ability to purchase rat poisons unless you have the proper pesticide operator licensing to do that. And she's inspired, Lisa's inspired coalition members across the United States and in other countries as well to continue to question the intelligence of using rat poisons, not just for killing raptors, but killing a whole range of secondary predators that actually are part of the solution and shouldn't be thrown out in the way of, basically we have more of a rat problem if we don't have these predators in our pocket. So I know that's not direct, but that indirect kind of impact conservation, I think, is really important, something we've probably all seen at all of our locations.
Anything to add, Julie?
No, I think just really monitoring raptors on migration. I know just for our site here in New Hampshire, we've been able to get birds on state wildlife plans as a result of that data. Kestrel, people looking more closely into what's happening with kestrels, specific habitat protection in northern New Hampshire because of low numbers of northern harriers. So yeah, lots and lots of examples.
Yeah, and I think it's obvious we could stay on for another 2 hours and talk about raptor issues. We'll have to schedule another roundtable, some panel at some point. But yeah, you all answered that question and pointed out some of those things. I think earlier the mention of banding data informing the designation of flyways, which are kind of large scale management units that we think about in terms of raptors and other birds and on migration, is an example of these kinds of data being used to inform what's going on. There's a lot of important bird areas that have been designated near and around hawk count sites, in part because of the diversity of raptors that are seen on migration in different places like that. So, and we're always looking for ways to get our information in front of the right people to inform policy and have that happen. And that's the magic formula that I think all of us here are working on finding that solution. I want to respect everybody's time. We've run a little bit over our hour. So thank you, Julie. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Alan, for sharing the last hour with us and fielding all of these great questions and sharing your experience and knowledge about raptors. Thanks to everyone who's tuned in to watch this today. We hope you'll join us for the rest of the month. We'll be having programs or videos or talks about raptors and raptor migrations for the next bit of the rest of the month. So thanks again. Have a great day. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye,
Dave, and thanks, everyone.